This is another look at the quality and quantity of signage around the Cove Bridge roadworks for the Rozelle interchange. And the issues we're going to look at today are the bad habits of putting signage up high where you aren't looking for it, particularly for cyclists and pedestrians. That low placement of signage is much better for pedestrians and cyclists. The sheer quantity of signage that's been put out to direct drivers around the diversions and through the roadworks versus the absolutely meagre signage that's been put out for cyclists in other sites. The use of large custom-made signs to indicate gates for delivery drivers and trucks, etc. The fact that it's bright, it's simple and it's easy to read, and we should be able to replicate that elsewhere. The difference in the quality of variable message signs between sites. Positioning of variable message signs. Are they clearly visible? Are they partly visible? Or are they completely invisible? And we'll have a look at the difference between the Cove Bridge and Lilyfield Road. And also the confusing signage that's sending mixed messages. That is signage that's been put up where it can be seen by both drivers and cyclists, and you wonder, who's this actually for? Essentially, what you're seeing in this ride through is a pre-opening stage audit done on a bike. And this is straight out of the Austroads road safety audit documentation, section 5.5. And what should be done is an audit involves a detailed inspection of a new scheme, its approaches and connections prior to its opening. The new road or treatment is driven, ridden or walked as appropriate by the audit team to ensure that the safety needs of all likely road users have been provided for. And it's not simply an as-built check of the approved design, but also an acceptance procedure on behalf of the travelling public. So you can have a look at this video as essentially being this. I've jumped on a bike, I've turned on the cameras, and I've ridden through it just to check what it looks like. And I would expect that all the diversion schemes around the West Connects, this would be done before every single one of them is opened, and also when they're modified, because obviously roads are going to be opening and closing at different times, and there's going to be different work sites opening and closing and gates moving, etc. And this Austroads guide should be followed to ensure that it's safe for the travelling public. Now let's have a look at what it looks like from on the bike. And I'm not going to put any snapshots in through the video, I'm going to put them in at the end. So here I am, I'm heading east on the Cove Bridge, and we come to this small closed off section. Okay, look, most of this ride through is pretty straightforward. There are in fact no diversions along here for cyclists. All that's happened is various traffic control measures have been put in for when there's works going on. Essentially right now, a cyclist doesn't have to divert off the path to the left or right because there's no permanent closures. One thing I do want to point out here though is this path for a long time has been a bit of a disaster area in terms of surface quality and placement of poles, etc. in the middle of the road, and really poorly designed and built on ramps and off ramps, and potholes and grates and what do you call those things, manhole covers, etc. in the middle of the path. So when you're cycling up here, you're looking down, and if you look at, we just went past a perfect example then of signage which is placed down nice and low because that's where you're looking. And if you're not looking down at the path here, chances are you're going to end up on your side because you're going to hit something and come off. And what I showed at the opening of this was actually a couple of snapshots from along here of where signage has been put up high. You're never going to see it because you're closely studying the path to make sure you're not going to hit something and crash. So anything that's essentially above your head height or even your neck height is too high. You'll never see it, not in a million years. So that's a cycling specific thing. It's different to driving. Driving, you're usually looking up a little bit further. There's a classic case of a sign that's way up high. Watch for trucks. No one's going to be watching for that sign to watch for trucks. Another thing to notice along here is just the sheer volume of signage that's been put out. The signs absolutely everywhere, and mainly there for drivers. The quantity of cones, etc., is just enormous. And you can see here, I've just had to ride over some road plates, etc. You've got to be keeping your eyes on the road at all times. The other thing, of course, you're looking for is we're crossing over a lot of driveways here, so you're constantly scanning left and right, looking for cars that are either coming out of these side roads or about to turn into them. You're not looking up. I just want to keep on emphasizing that. If the signage is not down low, it's a waste of space. I mean, we're crossing this driveway here of this petrol station, and you have to be looking both ways to make sure someone's not going to come belting out and flatten you or turn left and take you out. Now coming down the hill, there's that really good example of the signage for the truck drivers. Here's the running science sign. You can see it a long way back. It's crystal clear. It's well positioned. I mean, it's partly blocked further back by the service station sign, but otherwise it's pretty good. And there was a warning sign there for a detour for drivers, which was really good. Another warning sign saying detour ahead, so there's plenty of signs saying detour, detour, detour. And then we get to this sign here, which I think I'll come back to. This is a bit confusing because who's that detour for? Is that for cyclists or is that for drivers? We come around the corner, detour ahead. Now this is something that probably was never been picked up, and that is that there's so many people parking on the footpaths here that this family is unable to walk on the footpath. They have to walk down the middle of the road, which is pretty awful, and I don't know if that's been picked up in any of the road safety audits or has been included in the traffic management plan. Again, here's probably a slight mistake in terms of the signage. There's a detour sign going up here, and I get to the next intersection, there's a detour sign pointing me to the left. And I come around the corner and I find the road's blocked off. Now, is that sign there deliberately, or was that put up there before the road at the end of the street there was blocked and no one ever bothered to come back and remove it? Again, this just shows the value of the ride-throughs. Does that make sense? Is that confusing to the travelling public? Should that be cleaned up and moved? Now, you've just watched me ride up the path, up the hill, and turn around and come back. So we know the path is open in both directions. But as we're coming down the hill, just imagine I was coming out of the city for the first time, heading towards the Cove Bridge. I'm rolling down the hill here, and I've seen all these signs saying detour ahead, and then boom, there's a sign there saying detour. And it's positioned in the same place where all the cycling signs are positioned for the route. And the question which pops into my mind is, well, who's that detour aimed at? Is it aimed at drivers who are coming down the road to our right, or is it aimed at cyclists who are on this path? I don't know, you tell me. And this is just a small example of where signage has been, it's obviously aimed at drivers, but it could easily confuse other road users or other path users. If it said local traffic detour or something like that, it'd be fine. Or if there was also a sign there which said cyclist straight ahead. And the reason I bring this up, and this is a cycling specific thing, is we spend a lot of time cycling on either shared paths or separated paths where you've got a cycle path on one side and a pedestrian path on the other, and they might be separated by either a line or some shrubbery or rocks or whatever. And these paths often merge and separate, and the Bay Run is an absolute classic example of this. And we're quite used to coming up to where, say you're on a shared path and the path splits, and there'll be signage saying pedestrians to the left, cyclists to the right. So when I see a sign like this, it could easily be aimed at sending cyclists down this way because for some reason they've decided to separate out the traffic because you don't want pedestrians and cyclists going into, say, a path that's been narrowed, and you're going to have potential for conflicts and clashes and collisions and stuff like that. So this is where the value of the ride-through comes in, is just inspecting stuff like this and saying, does this make sense from the perspective of all road users along here, the pedestrians, the cyclists, and the drivers. I'm going to try and demonstrate why putting signs up high is a waste of time and money. And as I was explaining as we're riding up that path, you're spending all your time focused down low, looking at the quality of the path surface, which here is absolutely terrible, and again scanning left and right looking for cars. And essentially this is what your sight line looks like. You're not seeing anything up high, and this is why it's important to not put stuff up high, to put it down low when it's aimed at cyclists. It's fine to put signage that's aimed at truck drivers who are up nice and high, way up the top of the pole where they can see it over the cars, etc., and they can see it from a long way off, so they can get themselves in the correct lane to turn into the gates, etc. But again, this comes to the difference in the needs of cyclists versus the needs of truck drivers, and they're two completely different sets of road users, and they have specific needs and requirements, etc. And they use the roads differently, and this is why it's important to do these ride-throughs on a bike, so you're seeing it from a perspective of being on a bike as opposed to, say, being in a car or in a truck. Lastly, let's have a look at the difference between the quality of the signage used between the Cove Bridge site and Lilyfield Road, and the quality of the placement of the signage. Now, the first thing to notice about the sign that's the variable message sign used on the Cove Bridge site for the running science shop is it's really, really bright. It's high quality. There seem to be lots of pixels, whatever you want to call it, on the sign. You can see it from a long way back. and it's also been positioned where you can see it from a reasonable distance. Now, from a long way back, it's partly or fully blocked by a petrol station sign, but you come out from behind that sign and you see it with, in plenty of time. And it's probably designed more to be seen by pedestrians, I guess. I don't know. But pedestrians walking down the hill at a slow pace would have heaps of time to see it. So that's an example of a good quality sign that's well located. But if we go and have a look at what's happened on Lilyfield Road near the Catherine Street intersection, there's a very old, faded, poor quality variable message sign that's been put in place. There's only one of them. There's no warning signage further back saying detour ahead for cyclists. And as I've shown in this video, there's plenty of signage saying detour ahead aimed at motorists, but you don't see anything saying detour ahead for cyclists. But the worst aspect, or apart from the poor quality of the sign itself, the Lilyfield Road sign, every time I've driven or ridden down the road, has been partly or completely obscured, depending on where you are on the road, and I'll link to another video on that, by a truck that's been parked in front of the sign. And again, a ride through as per the road safety audit on a bike would have clearly shown that this is an issue and that cyclists have a big potential to actually completely miss the sign, to just zoom past it merrily without even knowing it's there because of the positioning of the truck. Now, okay, the truck is probably used for the roadworks, etc. It has to be there. That's all fine. But really, it's then up to whoever's managing the signage to move the signage or put up alternative signage to make it clear there's a detour coming up. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Then when you come around the corner and you actually go across Catherine Street and you go past the tram station, there's another very, very poor quality variable message sign that's in use there. It seems to have been moved in between my visits, and it's been put in an absolutely screwball location. And because of the age and the poor quality of this sign, the band, I guess, of visibility is very, very narrow. You can really only read the sign if you're standing directly in front of it. If you're slightly off to the side by more than a few degrees, it completely fades out and you can't read it. And it's also flipping over two screens playing a message. So you need to be able to observe it for a reasonable period of time to actually read the entire message. It's telling you, cyclist, you've got to go down to Roselle Bay. Wherever the hell Roselle Bay is. I had no idea where it was. There's no arrow or anything like that. And the positioning is absolutely bizarre. If you're coming at it from the right-hand side, it's actually blocked for a large distance by a tree on the side of the road, and you can really only see it as you go past it. And I mean, who looks to their right as they go past signs to read them? And if you're coming over the bridge, over the railway line from the left, again, there's trees and the curve in the way, curve of the road in the way. You can't see the sign from that side either. So I don't know exactly who the customers of this sign are supposed to be. I mean, who's it aimed at? Because it's completely useless. And again, if a ride through had been done on a bike as per the road safety audit guidelines, this kind of thing would have been very clearly picked up, and it should have been fixed weeks ago. The fact that it was a problem when I rode through earlier this week, 2 weeks after the diversion was put in place, is very telling that simple audit guidelines don't seem to be are not being followed, and therefore the quality of the signage is all over the place, and in particular the quality of the signage for cyclists is almost non-existent. Here's a quick recap. Avoid signage that's placed high where you're not going to see it. Cyclists need just as much signage as drivers do, so put it out there. Large custom-made signs can be made, they do exist. Let's get some made for cyclists. Old VMS signs are absolute rubbish, and there's absolutely no point in renting them and putting them out there because they're just not providing any value. Sign placement in all sites really must be checked from a bike. I mean, that's part of the audit guidelines. It's there in black and white. It needs to be done. Go and get a bike. And confusing signage sends mixed messages. Who are these signs aimed at? Are they aimed at cyclists? Are they aimed at pedestrians? Are they aimed at drivers? There needs to be clarity. That's it for now.